Hello! So today we are going to do a reading wrap-up of all the books that I read between September and December 2024 because I was already planning on doing a reading wrap-up, but when I went to see when was the last one that I did, I was surprised to find out the last time was beginning of September and that I was just talking about the books I read in August. But yes, let's start reviewing the books because honestly we have quite a bit of books to talk about. Let me count here on my list. 1, 3, 4, 5, 9, 10, 11, so we have 23 books to review. Some of these books, they were already part of a reading vlog that was already published, or they will be appearing on reading vlogs that will still be published, but there are some books here that they won't be in any reading vlog, so I'm going to give you a brief review for the books that have already appeared in reading vlogs or will be appearing in reading vlogs in the future, and then for the books that I haven't read in any vlog, I'll give you a more detailed review of the book. So let's start. I divided it between genres, so we have classics, general fiction, speculative fiction, romance, and non-fiction. Starting with classics, first we have Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. This book follows this young woman. She's 17 and she works as kind of like, not exactly a maid, a chambermaid, but she basically works as a company to this very wealthy woman, and they go for a vacation in Monaco, and there she meets this much older man who he's also very wealthy. He is from a noble family in the UK, and recently he also became a widow. His wife passed away in a mysterious manner, and during this trip they fall in love, they get married, and she moves to Manderley, which is the name of his fancy property in the countryside of England. And the moment our main character gets there, some weird things start happening, mainly because the shadow of the former wife, the late wife, is everywhere in this property. And this book will be in a reading vlog, so I won't talk more about it. The next two books will also be in reading vlog, so I'll just give you a brief overview about what they are about. So next we have The Virgin Suicides by Eugenides. I was not sure if I should put this book in classics or general fiction, but it is a book from early 2000s. I think it was published in 2002, so I think we can call it already a classic. But in The Virgin Suicides we follow the Lisbon sisters. They are the daughters of this very conservative religious family, and in the span of 1 year they all unalive themselves in kind of like a mysterious manner. No one really knows exactly why they did it, because they don't really give an explanation about why they decided to do it. There is just speculation, and the book is basically some boys that grew up around them and that were friends or friendly with the sisters, and they are remembering what happened with them and how that affected not only them but everyone that around them and that knew these sisters. And then the third classic that I read in the last months was A Little Princess by Frances Hodgson Burnett. And in this book we follow this little girl. She's the daughter of a very wealthy Indian man, and she's also, her mother has passed away, so her father doesn't really know how to raise her, so he sends her to this boarding school in England. And while her father is alive, the teachers treat her really well because she's extremely wealthy, but the owner of the school is not a very nice person, so things happen, and this book was just a little bit sad, surprisingly sad. Now moving on to general fiction, I have two books that I read that I can put in any of the other categories. So we have Yellowface by Kuang, and this book follows Juniper Hayward, and she is this white author who's really good friend with Athena, who is an Asian, extremely popular and successful author. One day while they are hanging out, Athena chokes to death, and Juniper, while the EMT, they are coming to help Athena, or basically they are taking Athena away because she passed away. Juniper steals Athena's unpublished manuscript and she reworks it a little bit and decides to publish it under her name. And this book's basically her journey of plagiarizing her friend's work and also kind of spiraling. Then I also read Whisper Network by Chandler, and this book, it is inspired by the Me Too movement. It takes place in this very prestigious, cool company in Texas, and this group of friends in this company, they decide to open a lawsuit against the company and against their boss for his bad behavior, for SA and his harassment, and basically because his harassment that was based because of their gender. And it will be in a reading vlog soon, so I'll talk more about it there. Now let's move on to speculative fiction. In this bracket, we'll talk about sci-fi, fantasy, and also horror. So first we have 21 A Space Odyssey by Arthur C. Clarke. This is the book that it was written in tandem with the movie, and basically in this alternate universe, this monolith is responsible for propelling the development of humans. And one day they find a similar monolith that was on Earth. They found one buried on the moon, and then they go on this journey to figure out what is this monolith, why there is this ancient monolith on the moon. And this book was already featured in a reading vlog, so I won't talk more about it. Hello, it's Editing Carol here, and this is actually the third time I'm recording a review for this short story, because the short story is called The Garden by the author Tomi. I'm not sure how to pronounce the author's last name, so here's just the cover of the short story called The Garden. And the reason why I am re-recording this review is because the first time it was kind of confusing what I was saying, and the second time I was just kind of trying to think, what do I want to put out on the internet? And so I decided just to re-record, even though the video, by the time I'm filming this, it's completely edited. I just need to cut the original or the second review out of this video. But let's talk about the short story. So The Garden is a short story that follows this American young woman who she comes to Brazil to go on a wellness journey that her mother has gone previously. And the whole short story is kind of a metaphor for mental health. So I have two issues with this short story. The first one is that the metaphor just didn't land, did nothing. Short story did nothing. The second part of my issue with this book is that the character, I believe she's supposed to be kind of an unlikable character, and if she isn't supposed to be an unlikable character, then she's very unlikable. And she said some of the things she says and the way she acts, it's kind of as if she believes Brazil is an inferior country, and she doesn't really research about the country apparently, or the culture, and she just has this superiority complex. And this we could say, oh, it's just because this is an unlikable character. My problem with it is that the way the author wrote the story, she just missed the mark on some little things, because there are some cultural inconsistencies, things that are completely not true, wouldn't happen at all in Brazil, but the author decides to put it on this short story. And it almost feels like the choice of the location for the short story was just like a tokenized choice. The choice of Brazil, it's just a token because this is a tropical country. Another issue I had with this book is that there are some negative stereotypes that are completely not true about the country in the short story. One that stood out to me the most is that our main character, her tour guide, is driving through a highway, which I assume it will be somewhere near a very big city, and the narrator slash our main character, she just says, oh, so we are driving through the jungle, and I just keep thinking, like, if she is on a highway, she's not on the jungle. But foreigners do have this stereotype, which is in some ways quite a negative stereotype about Brazil just basically being a big jungle, when in reality it isn't. Yes, there is a jungle, but the whole country isn't a jungle. There are areas that are not jungles. There are quite a few areas that are not jungle. And our main character wouldn't be driving through a jungle at the moment where it shows up on the short story. If she was just an unlikable character, for me it would be okay. But because we have an unlikable character plus cultural inconsistencies, things that just wouldn't happen in Brazil, and it almost feels like the author didn't research about the country, and the only reason they chose this location was because it is a tropical country. Plus the fact that our main characters, they just talk in a way that not almost, but kind of perpetuates negative stereotypes. For me, in the end, this part also just felt a little bit in bad taste, a little bit disrespectful towards the country and the people of the country. And this short story, for me, it just didn't work in all fronts. Not in the way it was written, not in the message, not in anything, actually. And by the way, apparently I saw on Goodreads that the author lived in Brazil, and honestly I was quite shocked, because some of the things the author says, like, it's a no. This doesn't happen in Brazil. One of the things that really stood out to me was they go to a gas station and the tour guide pumps the gas, but like in Brazil there is an employee at the gas station that will pump the gas for you. It's not the client that pumps the gas in the car. And there's just these little things that just irk me a little bit when you add everything to it. It's like one speck of snow that starts turning into this giant snowball that starts turning into an avalanche. And I ended up giving the garden 1 star, which I actually rarely give 1 star to books. I think so far I have only given 5 books 1 star ever, and this is including the garden. So let's move on to the next books. Now let's go to a second short story, which is part of the same little group of short stories, which is called Persephone by Lev Grossman. And in this short story, we follow a teenager called Persephone, and she tends to have very strong headaches, and that's just something weird about her. And one day she goes to class, and she starts getting really annoyed and really stressed with her colleagues, and suddenly she just blows up the classroom. And the thing about short story is that it has so much potential. It starts so well, but then it ends out of nowhere. I feel like this short story would have worked so well if it was a full-length novel, but as a short story it just doesn't work because it ends at nowhere. That I just needed more. I just needed more of a closure, more of an explanation about what is happening in this short story. Then I read Rouge by Awad, and this is kind of like a horror-esque, body horror kind of book. If you like the substance, I haven't watched the movie, but I think it has similar vibes. But basically in Rouge we follow this woman called Belle, and her mom was very obsessed with beauty. She passes away suddenly, and Belle, she needs to go to San Diego to take care of her mother's, of everything that comes after someone passes away. And there are some weird things start happening, and this book will be in a reading vlog, so I won't talk much about it because it is a very weird book, and if I start talking about it, it might take a while. Then we have Flatland, A Romance of Many Dimensions by Edwin A. Abbott. This is kind of a speculative fiction sci-fi-esque novella that will also be in a reading vlog, so I won't take much time talking about it. But basically, this short story takes place in this world where everything is flat and the people are basically shapes, so you have the squares, the triangles, the circles, and it is also a society that it is very harshly divided between genders and social class. And I'll talk more about it in a future reading vlog. It is also, by the way, a classic speculative fiction story. Apparently it inspired Stephen King and other authors. So let's move on to romance, and this is the section where I have the most books to talk about, and it's also not in chronological order because there are some books here that they are from one series, so I decided to just group them together so I can talk about the series itself. So first we have Wildfire by Hannah Grace. This is the sequel to Icebreaker, and in this book we follow Russ and Aurora, and they have a one-night stand. Aurora kind of runs away and things are awkward between Russ and Aurora, and then they are both counselors at the summer camp and they basically need to spend the whole summer together, so it's very much forced proximity. This book was already in a reading vlog, so let's leave it at that. Then we have Charlie, Love and Other Cliches by Ella Maise. This book was also in a reading vlog, but in Charlie, Love and Other Cliches by Ella Maise we follow Charlie, who is this PR manager who has no backbone, and she has a complicated relationship with her family, and there is also this guy with whom she went on a few dates in the past, but things didn't end that well, and now the guy is working at the same company as her, and this book is basically a lot of romantic cliches. Then I read Water Under the Bridge by Kels and Denise. This book is not on the reading vlog, so let's talk a little bit more about it. So in Water Under the Bridge we follow these two characters. I forgot their names because I actually didn't have this book, but we follow this woman who is trying to get a job at this sustainable company that invests on sustainable projects of sorts, and she goes for a job interview there and she meets this guy. Their first impression of each other, it's not that great, and then the guy happens to be one of the people responsible for interviewing her, and then she doesn't get the job and things are awkward between them. I did not finish this book. I think I got until, I don't know how far along. It was very much at the beginning of the book that I decided to stop just because the pacing was not it. Also, it came too sexual too quickly. So for context, these characters, they meet I think 3 times, and 2 of these times it was on a professional setting. The first one, he's interviewing her for a job, and on the second one it's a work event, and his mind is thinking of her in such a possessive sexual way that it just feels inappropriate, considering they are in a professional setting, and also they just met twice, and also he's kind of like jealous, but they just met twice and it was in a professional setting, and it was just so weird, kind of toxic, not my kind of book, and it was not giving romance, like that fantasy that romance novels are supposed to sell. And then the moment I decided to stop reading this book was one where he sees her going for a jog running the streets of New York, and he, besides the fact that they don't get along, he just decides to follow her, and for me that was just so creepy and inappropriate. Like, if you see someone on the street going for a run, just don't start following them without their consent. That's kind of stalking. That's not nice, and that's I stopped reading at this point, and I don't know what else to tell you. Hello, Editing Carol here again, and I decided to re-record this review because, again, I feel like it was a little bit confusing, and also I feel like I lost the plot a little bit because these books, I haven't talked about it yet, and I guess for the first time I kind of went a little bit confusing on it. So the next book is actually a series, which is the Vancouver Agitators series by Meghan Quinn. And the way I'm going to structure this review is that I will talk a little bit about each book and the rating that I gave it, and then I'll talk about the series in general. So the first book is called Kiss and Don't Tell, and in this book we follow Pacey, and I believe the girl's name is Winnie. And Pacey, he's the goaltender for the Vancouver Agitators, which is the hockey team of Vancouver in this fictional universe. And Pacey, he has recently gone through an injury that he's still recovering from. And also the team just missed the playoffs for the first time in a while, and he's kind of spiraling because he thinks one of the reasons they missed the playoffs is because of his performance, which has been compromised because of his injury. And then Winnie, she just recently lost her mother, and she's going on this journey to her mother's hometown of Banff in Canada. And while she's on this journey of going through Banff, she ends up being stopped by a very heavy storm. Her car ends up stuck, I think it's in a ditch, and she ends up walking through to this cabin in Banff, the only cabin that has a light on in the region where her car is stuck at. And the cabin turns out to be owned by one of Pacey's friends. But basically Pacey and 5 guys of the hockey team with whom he's very good friends at are spending the summer there. They usually spend the summer at this cabin in Banff. And because it is storming a lot, they offer Winnie to stay the night with them until the storm stops and she can have her car towed. From the first moment he sees her, Pacey is infatuated by Winnie, and as the days goes on, they start getting close and he basically has a crush on her. The only problem is that Winnie is the ex-girlfriend from Pacey's half-brother, and Winnie has no idea about it. So that's basically the plot, and this is a romance, and they get together. Overall, I thought this book was funny and a good fast-paced, no need of using much brain power sort of book, and I feel like it was really good for the time where I picked this book up. Because for context, I picked this book up somewhere between 3 AM and 4 AM, and there was a literal construction site outside my window. I couldn't sleep and I needed something that would distract me from all the noise outside my window, and that's why I started reading this book and this series, because I saw on Book Talk people saying good things about it. Now let's move on to the second book in the series, which is called Those Three Little Words, and in this book we follow Eli Hornsby, who is known as the mentor of the group, and then we have Penny, who is the sister of Pacey, who is the main guy in the first book. And Penny, she also works for the hockey team. And basically Eli and Penny, they have a one-night stand, and Penny ends up getting pregnant, and Eli goes to live with her to help her because she's having his baby. And the thing about this book is that out of all of the books in the series, I think this is my least favorite one of them. It was just a little bit too long. The last pages, there was no need of it. The amount of smut in this book was completely unnecessary, and honestly, I feel like we go into romance novels for the fantasy, and in this book there is no fantasy. For me, these characters will stay together forever, but they will stay together forever because Eli has abandonment issues. I get they might like each other, but in the long term, I don't see them actually working out. I feel like they will stay together because the main guy has abandonment issues. I feel like this book also, there are so many little things that the author could have gone back to make this a stronger story. but they just ended up being just loose threads that were not, that she didn't take advantage of. And yeah, so this is it for this book. The third book I read was Right Man, Right Time, I believe is the name. This is the one I saw on Book Talk and I saw a lot of praise for, and honestly I don't understand what the praise for this book is. So basically in this one we follow Silas and what is her name? Ollie. So Silas, he is one of the star players of the Vancouver team, and Ollie, she's a journalist student. And one day, while Ollie is in this bar with her friends celebrating the end of her internship, she ends up bumping into her office rival, and turns out her office rival is currently dating her shitty ex, and Ollie ends up saying, oh yeah, I have a boyfriend as well, and he's also here in the bar. And then she sees Silas there alone, so she walks up to him, asks if she can kiss him and if he can pretend to be her boyfriend for like 5 seconds, because she's kind of embarrassed, I guess, for being single and bumping into her ex-boyfriend and her office rival. And Silas ends up saying okay, and he pretends to be her boyfriend, and in return he asks her to pretend to be his girlfriend during official events, because Silas was in a toxic relationship and his toxic ex is now working for the team and will now be present in a lot of events, and he needs someone to help be like a buffer between him and his toxic ex, to help him cope with it, but also to not go back to that toxic cycle of their relationship. And because he's still not very comfortable talking about it with his friends, he asks Ollie to just pretend to be his girlfriend, no questions asked, and she does that. This is a fake dating romance, but also an age gap romance, because Silas is 31, Ollie is 21. So for context, after Ollie's boss finds out that she's dating Silas, he offers her to continue on this internship. He also basically asks her to kind of try and get intel on the hockey team because he has beef with the owner. And let's talk about overall the book. First of all, the plot, I just don't buy it. Also, Ollie's boss is supposed to be a very famous, reputable journalist with this very famous, reputable website, news site, and I just don't buy it because of the way he acts. And like, in the end, skip 1 minute if you want 0 spoilers about this book. But Ollie's boss ends up publishing, I think it's called hearsay. He publishes something, one of his employees overhears someone talking, and while publishing it, he doesn't wear proper wording, he doesn't do any checking of the information, and I just thought that was shocking because, sir, you are opening yourself to being sued, but also destroying your reputation. And considering this is supposed to be a reputable journalist, a very famous reputable journalist, I just don't buy it. Also, I think this narrative of the journalist with no morals, it's kind of a little bit overused and just doesn't really make sense for the story, and especially in the way it was using the story, it was just like a cheap, easy plot point of sorts. Another thing about the book is the same problem that I had with the Street Little Words, where I didn't buy the fantasy, is that I don't buy the fantasy about this one. I don't feel like these characters will have their happily ever after, which, not that the fantasy romance, I feel like they will stay together maybe for a very long time, but mainly because they are comfortable around each other, because honestly they don't have a lot in common. I don't understand why they stayed together, which, considering this is a romance novel and it's supposed to sell this fantasy, I personally don't think it works. Now let's move on to the 4th book in this series, and this is the last book in the series that I read, which is called He's Not My Type. And in this book we follow Halsey and Blakely. Halsey, he is another one of the star hockey players of the Vancouver team, another one with a giant salary, which honestly by this point I don't know how the cap space in this hockey team works, because they all seem to have really big salaries, and if you look at the salaries and the contracts of real life hockey players, I'm not sure how it works in the series, even though, to be honest, in every single hockey romance series I see, most of them seem to have this problem of hyperinflating their salaries, and the cap space in these teams don't make much sense. But going back to the plot of this book, Halsey is currently dealing with a lot of grief because his twin brother, who was also a hockey player, with whom he was really close with and who was an alcoholic, he recently passed away due to a car accident. And he also for many years have been kind of cooking this massive crush on Blakely. Blakely, she's one of the, I think she works as a PR for the hockey team. She's also best friends with Penny, who is the main character in the second book in the series. And Blakely, she has been on a long-term relationship for many years, but she recently broke up with her boyfriend, and she also moved out of their apartment. And the apartment she just recently moved to, a pipe burst, and now she needs another place to live at. And when Halsey's friends hear that she needs a place to live, they just offer Halsey's place because they know Halsey has a massive crush on her. So this ends up being a forced proximity sort of novel, and it's through this forced proximity that they become friends and then lovers. And basically this book, it's fine. I don't know what else to talk about it. It's fine. It's great for reading at 4 a.m. when there is a construction site outside your window. It's very basic. So let's talk about the series as a whole, because there were some things about the series that I think it worked and some things that it didn't work. So starting by the things that did work, I feel like from a perspective of like hockey life, I have no experience with being a hockey wag, but I feel like this is the most realistic one. There isn't something that it is so out of pocket that took me out of the novel, like the hockey player being followed by paparazzi and being a star in tabloids, with, let's be honest, hockey players are not stars of tabloids. They will be recognized by fans of the sport, but not tabloid stars. So in this point, in this aspect, I think this series worked. But in the aspects that it didn't work, is that looking back at it, I kind of questioned myself. Especially with the first book, which I said I really enjoyed, I ended up giving it 4 stars. I questioned myself, did I give it 4 stars because I read it at 4 a.m. and my brain was half working, or did I really enjoy it? Because there's just some things about these books that for me it doesn't work. I ended up giving 3 stars for all the other 3 books in the series, and let's talk about it. First of all, is that these books are just extremely spicy to a point that it is unnecessary, and it feels like book talk derogatory. And I understand some people love spicy books, it's just that in this context I don't think it worked, especially in the way it happened, because I was expecting these books to be spicy but not as spicy as they were. And my problem with it was that for a good chunk of the book it was just a cutesy romance, and then the spice started to happen, and there was spicy scene after spicy scene after spicy scene after spicy scene after spicy scene. It felt like it didn't end, and it felt like it flipped a switch, and it almost felt like a completely different book in a way. And honestly, I did the most scheming of scheming possible with the scenes, because they weren't really adding to the book. And I think that's one thing that really annoyed me, because I have no problem with smutty books, I have no problem with spicy scenes, but when they start to become excessive and they add nothing to the book, personally, it kind of annoys me. And it's to the point where I'm not sure if we can put this book in the category of erotica, because in erotica is the spice that is driving the plot forward, but in these books, besides the first scene, it's not really driving the plot forward, it's just there, it's just page count, and it is repetitive, and it literally doesn't need to be there. If you cut it off, it will make zero difference in the story. Another problem that I had with this series is that in the first book, it really felt like they were really good friends, and in the fourth book as well, it really felt like they were close. But in the second and the third book, but especially in the second book, which is Those Three Little Words, it almost felt like they were not part of a series. It didn't feel like the characters were that close, and it was just kind of like a little bit weird in the context of this being a series of books following friends. And a third issue I had with these books is that, taking off the fourth book, until the third book, all the characters were American, were born in the United States. And the thing is, this is a book that follows hockey players. Hockey is Canada's national sport. It is the most popular sport in Canada. And if you look at the roster for NHL teams, most of the players were born in Canada. And considering this book also takes place in Canada, it just feels weird that all the characters, both the men and the women, are American. It just made kind of like zero sense. I guess one being it's fine, two being it's fine, but like by the third book you have 6 characters that are American canon. It's on the canon. They were born in the United States, and yet they all play hockey. And the women, for some reason, they decided to move to Canada, including one that wants to be a journalist and decided to move to Canada, even though the United States have really good journalism schools. It just doesn't make sense. In the fourth book, though, it's kind of a little bit more ambiguous, because they don't openly say they are Canadian, but they also don't openly say they're American. They kind of imply a little bit of both, and the author lives kind of in this gray area where you keep wondering, are they American or are they Canadian? I'm not sure, because it's not confirmed. And the books in general, even though they do take place in Canada, they're just some Americanisms that, like, I'm not Canadian, I'm not American, but even for me, it kind of just doesn't make sense. When it comes to language, for me, it's a little bit more difficult to spot the difference, especially American English, Canadian English, because English is not my first language. But I saw some people on Goodreads talking about it, and besides the language, there are other things in this book that are just Americanisms that don't make sense in the context of this book taking place in Canada. One of them is that Edwin Bowman, they go shop at a Target, and if I'm not mistaken, there are no Targets in Canada. Like, there are just some little things that it just don't make sense when you put in perspective that this book takes place in Canada. So you need to suspend your disbelief a little bit in that sense. So overall, I don't think I will continue reading this series. I know there is a 5th book out, but overall I don't think I will continue reading it, because honestly, like, it's fine if you are reading it at 4 a.m. and there's a construction site outside your window and your brain is half working, but otherwise I'm not sure if I would have half enjoyed these books. The writing wasn't that magnificent. The story wasn't something I think I will be thinking about, and it's fine. If you are curious about reading it, I wouldn't say you shouldn't read it. I would say give it a try. But if you have a similar taste in books, especially when it comes to romance novels as me, maybe skip this one. So yes, this is the review of the Agitators series. Now let's move on to the rest of the books in this list, because this video will be like super long just for me ranting. I read Hands Down by Mariana Zapata. This book was on a reading vlog. So hands down, we follow Zach and Bianca. Zach, we meet him in The Wolf Winnipeg and Me. He is a professional American football player. He is in his mid-30s, so kind of like end of his career, and he's also reached this weird point where he's not in a great spot career-wise. And then we have Bianca. She's kind of like a chef influencer. She's a cooking influencer, and her and Zach, they were really good friends growing up, but they lost touch as they became adults. And in this book they meet again, and this book is a romance novel, so there will be some romance in it. Then I read Part of Your Road by Abby Jimenez. This book follows Alexis and Daniel. Alexis is heir to this very prestigious medical empire. She also lives in the big city, and Daniel, he lives in this very small tiny town. And basically Alexis has a complicated relationship with her parents and her ex-boyfriend because they are narcissists. And this book has already been in a reading vlog, so if you want to know more about my opinions, check that vlog. Then we have Better Than the Movies by Lynn Painter. This book follows Liz and Wes. These are YA romance, so the characters in this book, they are teenagers, but Liz, she has been in love with this boy since she was a kid, and the boy just moved back to the city, and she asks who is her neighbor for help in order to get the attention of this boy that she likes. And this book just basically feels like a 2000s rom-com. Then we read The Wolf Winnipeg and Me by Mariana Zapata. And basically, I already talked about the book quite a bit in this channel. But in The Wolf, Winnipeg and Me, we follow Aiden and Vanessa. Aiden, he's this very famous American football player, and he's also Canadian. And Vanessa is his assistant. At the beginning of the book, she quits, and a few weeks later, Aiden shows up at her door, and he basically asks her to marry him because he wants to get a green card. So in return for him paying off her student loans and buying her a house, Vanessa decides to agree and marry him. This book, in classic Mariana Zapata fashion, it's very much slow burn. It's very much a slice of life, and you spend the whole book in the head of Vanessa. And Aiden, he's a very much silent, woody character. He doesn't let his emotions show very much, so to kind of figure out when does he start seeing our female main character as more than a friend, you really need to see the breadcrumbs he starts leaving around. And the first time I read it, I had a theory about when does that happen, and by rereading this book, I feel like my theory is correct, and I actually liked The Wolf Winnipeg and Me way more by rereading it. I was afraid that by rereading it, I would not enjoy it as much, but it was the contrary. I like it even more. I feel like as with every reread, we start noticing more little things, more details about the story, and I think it just added to my enjoyment of this novel. And then I read Fall With Me by Becca Mack, and this book will be in a future reading vlog, and I'll leave my review for that vlog. But in Fall With Me, we follow Jackson and Lennon. Jackson, he is a hockey player who is known for being kind of like, he doesn't do serious relationships, and he's kind of like the enforcer of the team. He's always getting into fights. And Lennon, she's the team's new photographer. Jackson and Lennon, they meet during what was supposed to be Lennon's honeymoon, but she left her fiancé at the altar practically, so she's on the honeymoon alone. And Jackson, he originally goes to this trip with another girl, but they have a fight, she leaves, and then he and Lennon, they start getting along, they have a one-night stand. And when they've come back to Vancouver, they found out that they are going to be working together, that it's just Lennon's now working for the same team that he plays at. And this book is actually the 4th book in the Playing for Keeps series. And again, I'll leave my review for the book for the vlog, because this video will already be very long. Now let's go to the only non-fiction I read in this past couple of months, which is On Our Best Behavior, The 7 Deadly Sins and the Price Women Pay to Be Good. And this book, I believe it's also on a reading vlog. But basically, on this non-fiction, the author, she analyzes how the 7 deadly sins was used by religion and also the patriarchy as a way to control women, and also in a way also how it affects negatively women but also men. And I thought it was quite an interesting book. It definitely made me rethink some things, and it is also the way it is written. It is easy to understand, it is easy to read, it is not very complicated, and I would recommend reading this book. The only thing is the author, she used to work for Goop, so if you really despise the way, like the Goop-esque way of writing and reporting, maybe you won't enjoy this book as much, but otherwise try reading it. I would recommend, especially if you are a woman. Hello, it's Editing Carol here, and I am back, but this time is to add more books to this review. I ended up finishing reading 3 books at the end of 2024, which I finished reading like a few days after I filmed the original reading wrap-up, and let's just add to this wrap-up, because technically I finished reading them in December. It's just that I finished reading them the last like 3 days of the year. But let's start by the non-fiction. I finished reading Quiet by Susan Cain. This is a non-fiction that talks about the positives and negatives of quiet people, of introverts, and the powers of the introvert and being an introvert. And this is a book where it will be on a reading vlog soon, so I'll talk more in detail about it there. But overall, I feel like the beginning of this book was honestly quite weak. I felt like it was just saying things I already knew and was adding nothing new to my life. But the more I kept reading the book, I think it started to get better, and by the end of the book I feel like it was a really good book. And if you are an introvert, I recommend reading it, but especially if you are an extrovert, I really recommend reading it if you are an extrovert, so you can understand a little bit more of the quiet people. The second book I finished reading in this meantime was The Prisoner's Throne by Holly Black, and this is a sequel to The Stolen Heir. And again, there will be a reading vlog, and it will be a reading vlog dedicated just to this duology, so I'll talk more about it there. But in The Prisoner's Throne, we follow the aftermath of what happened in the Stolen Heir, and this book we have the POV of Oak. And then I also finished reading A Perfect Vintage by Chelsea Fagan. This is another book that will be in a reading vlog soon, and that I'll talk more about it and about my thoughts of this book there. But in A Perfect Vintage, we follow Leah, and she's this American decorator, and she specialized at redoing French chateaus and turning them into these fancy hotels. And at the beginning of the book, we are following her as she's getting ready for a new project, and her cousin and best friend, she's going through a tough divorce, so her cousin and her cousin's child, who Leah considers to be her niece and with whom she's very close to, they ended up joining her in this project at the French countryside. During her time at the chateau, at redoing the chateau, she basically falls in love with the 24-year-old son of her client. Leah, by the way, she's 34, so there is she's 36, so there is a 12-year age gap difference there. And the book basically follows her experience of dating a much younger man, of dating her boss's son, but also her niece has a crush on her boyfriend, and it is just a mess, and it is kind of, it feels like reading a gossip magazine, and I'll talk more about it in the reading vlog. And yes, that's it for all the books I read. Those are all the 23 books I read between September and December 2024. If you read any of these books, please let me know in the comment section. Tell me what was your opinion about them. And I'm tired. I've been talking for a long time. And if you liked this video, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. And I hope to see you with another video soon, possibly a reading vlog containing one of the books mentioned during this wrap-up.